Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Bill, and I'm here with Steve.
Good morning.
Morning, Steve. And we're also here with
Gerry.
Good morning, Gerry.
Good morning.
And everybody, welcome to the Field Guides. Every episode, Steve and I research a natural history topic, and then we pick a natural place and head out into the field to share everything we learn. In this episode, we are here at Reinstein Woods, and this is actually a repeat place for us, right, Steve?
Yeah, this is our first repeat.
Episode 2 we recorded here last year at this time.
Yep, the Fall Colors episode.
That's right, and similar to last time, I am sick.
Yeah, it's not as bad though.
No, we are here on a beautiful fall day in late September, and we're hunting for
Witch hazel.
It's a tree species that Steve and I thought, hey, this is a good time of year because witch hazel is doing something pretty unique.
Right. It's flowering. Well, we hope it's flowering, right?
We hope it's flowering. That's what we hope to find. But before we get into witch hazel, we should introduce our guest.
Yeah.
We're here with Gerry Rising, who's a Renaissance man of Western New York, right, Gerry?
I don't know what that means.
That means you're involved in lots of wonderful things. So you're a mathematician, you're a writer.
Fair enough.
I got to know Gerry from his article that was for decades in the Buffalo News, and you've just published a book, right?
Yes, I've published a book called Birds and Bird Watchers. It's a collection of 100 of my essays, most of which appeared in that Nature Watch column in the news. There are a few others. Get out and buy it.
So I ordered my copy, and Steve better order his soon.
Yes.
Gerry asked to come along on one of our recording sessions. Our last two we did were a little different, so we decided to hold off and invite Gerry on this one. But to start off talking about witch hazel, why don't we talk about where the name comes from?
Yeah.
None of the accounts I read were 100% sure where it came from, but
Sure.
One account says that in England, witch hazel and witch elm were synonyms for each other.
Okay.
And when colonists came here to America, they saw witch hazel. It looked like witch elm, and so they just started calling it witch hazel.
All right, so I'll tell you what I found.
Okay.
And since I don't always completely mark my notes, this could be from Wikipedia for all I know. Etymology is always sort of tricky like that.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea. Sometimes it seems like you have two pretty surefire sources.
I got to cut you off.
Okay.
Look,
Oh, and we found him.
we already found witch hazel.
Apparently the name witch, which we think about as like a Halloween-related thing, and this is an October episode, so we can talk about that a little bit, but the Middle English witch, that means pliant or bendable.
Or bendable, yep.
Right, and the only other place I saw this was this weird video on YouTube where they're talking about mystical things, and they're like, oh, and the plant's very flexible, and I'm like, okay, lady, and I had no interest in it. But then I came across this, so I guess that is somewhat interesting. I mean, the lady was talking about the amount of water that's in it. I don't really understand the bendable aspect.
It relates to what I was saying.
Okay.
Because witch elm in Europe, people did use the branches to build furniture and other things. So it was easily bendable. It would bend without breaking. That's where the witch part of the name came from.
Now, the hazel part of the name, are you aware of this?
I don't know.
Oh, so apparently, traditionally, hazel plants are used for divining rods for finding water. And so witch hazel, witch hazel was used also for the same thing. And so they are calling it the bendable hazel.
Right. And I've heard that.
Apparently,
I heard that too. This is where kind of the stories overlap and get mixed up because I heard the witch part of the name came from the dowsing too. Because do you know about dowsing, Gerry?
Sure, water witching.
Right. That's what I'm talking about. So it's also referred to as water witching.
Witching.
So
I like it.
I don't want to spend too much time on dowsing, but for the people that don't know, that's where someone would take a Y-shaped piece of wood, or they would take two L-shaped pieces of wood, and they'd walk around, and supposedly through the motions of the branches, they could find water, but they also used it to find gold or gemstones, or even I found grave sites.
Oh, okay.
So, of course, this is pseudoscience. But if you want a great internet rabbit hole to go down, just type in dowsing and start. There's amazing, crazy stories out there about what people believe.
Right,
so,
yeah.
Check it out sometime. But yeah, witch hazel here in America was used for those purposes. Mm-hmm. So that could have to do with the witch part of the name. It could have to do with the hazel part of the name.
Right.
All right, but now that we're here in front of one, why don't we talk a little bit about what it looks like?
Sure. So one of my favorite parts about the plant, and I mean, I'm just going to get right to the point, is the leaf. I love this, sort of like an elm. Mm-hmm. It has that uneven base.
Yep, it's oval.
Yeah.
with a wavy margin,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's about, the leaves are about 4 to 5 inches long, about 3-4 inches wide,
Mm-hmm.
and it's typically a shorter deciduous tree.
Right. I was seeing anything up to 30 feet at the most, but
30 feet
usually
at the most.
between I think it was 10 and 20.
Yeah, 10 and 20, and I saw a few accounts that rarely to 30 feet or rarely to 40 feet. And I used the word tree, but really most accounts I said it's a shrub or rarely a small tree.
Right.
Although that's a fine line people draw. What's a shrub and what's a tree?
Sure. We talked about that before with sumac.
But it's definitely going to be in the understory.
Right.
You're never going to see it growing up tall.
Yeah, that was another thing I wanted to say. Just understory, so it's in the woods, and apparently it prefers moist soils, which
That's right.
that makes sense here.
The one account I read said it grows in well-shaded forests and that it grows in clusters. So it's not evenly distributed throughout the forest.
Oh, that has a lot to do with what I was saying with the seed dispersal.
See, I was just going to ask you about that.
Right.
So, and that's why, because its method of seed dispersal, it's not being evenly distributed throughout the forest. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Sure.
All right, so we talked about what it looks like. Talked about, the range. So if you're anywhere in the eastern U.S., you should be able to find witch hazel.
Oh, yeah.
If you're in a well-shaded forest. Some of the Midwestern states have it, and then all throughout southern Canada as well. Let's say the scientific name.
Oh, Hamemelis,
I heard-
virginiana?
Hamemelis?
Hamemelis.
Whatever.
I never get it right.
Virginiana.
Yeah.
So we have a leaf gall. Jerry's pointing out some kind of discoloration on one of the leaves.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but notice this one. This is a beautiful...
Oh, so folks, there's on one of the leaves, it almost looks like a horn projecting up and out of the leaf.
It's
So-
like a rose prick or a rose
Yes.
thorn, yeah.
Do you know what that is?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh.
Do you know?
Well, when I was doing research, I saw there were 2 or 3 galls that typically form. And I said, Steve will look into the galls. I don't need to do that.
I'm writing a thesis right now, so I didn't look into galls. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole.
All right, so we're going to have to look into that post-recording and post that up
Yeah,
on the
we'll
website.
post a picture and a description.
So there's definitely a gall here. Some insect laid its egg, and its larva is using the leaf to develop. But it really looks like a little thorn poking up out of the leaf.
Oh, yeah, that's not the only one.
No.
Here's one that's turned
There's
all
several of them
completely
there,
black.
Oh, yeah.
Right above it, right?
So also on the plant, we can see right now. Oh, what'd you see, Steve?
No, that one, this one, I'm going to take the leaf off. It's not going to do much anymore. There we go. So I don't know, if we look at the bottom, I think that's an escape hole.
Ah.
So this is an old one. I think maybe it was earlier in the season, and
Yeah.
the
So the
insect
insect-
completed that part of its lifestyle,
And
or
emerged.
life cycle, I should say. Yeah.
All right, so we should say plug for our first episode. If you want to know about galls, go
Yeah.
back and listen to our very first episode on goldenrod galls.
Right.
Why don't we talk about the flowers now? The crazy thing about witch hazel, the reason we chose this species to do here in September, is because right now most things are either finished flowering or it's the end of their flowering season.
Mhm.
But witch hazel is just starting to blossom right now. So it flowers from September to November. Some accounts I read said into December,
Oh yeah.
which is a great reason why it's called winter bloom. That's
Mhm.
one of its common names. And the other Hamemelis species, they blossom from January to March.
Yeah, it's always like a early spring, late
Yeah, like
winter. type
most.
thing. Yeah.
Because the other 2 Hamemelis species I found are more southern species,
Oh,
down
yeah.
in like Texas and the Ozarks.
Mhm.
So it makes sense that they'd be blooming as early as January. So this is our species of witch hazel blooms outside their blooming season. And I did find a study that hypothesized
I did too.
that's why it evolved this strategy, was to avoid
Mhm.
competing with the other members of its genus.
Right.
So I want to read, normally we don't read directly from things, but John Eastman in his book of Forest and Thicket, yeah, Jerry said he read the witch hazel account before he came along with us today.
Studied out.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is what John Eastman had to say. I love how he said it. From September to December, even as they drop their leaves, these shrubs flame into yellow torches. Because even as the leaves start to desiccate and fall off the tree, the blossoms are coming out, which to me just seems crazy. Like this tree's, I'm dropping
Yeah.
my leaves, getting ready for the wintertime. Oh, I'm going to flower now too. So the flowers I found, they're in clusters of 3, and they have 4 slender, twisted strap-like petals. And those are about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch long. And whenever I've seen witch hazel in flower, it's pale to dark yellow. Have you ever seen it red or orange, though?
No.
Because a couple accounts I read said the flowers could be red and orange, too.
So the very tip of the female part of the flower, it's sort of a two-parted stigma.
The part that receives the pollen.
The part that receives the pollen, that can actually turn reddish. And I wonder if that's what they're talking about. I've also seen pictures where the sepals are sort of a red, and also I heard that the petals eventually do, with age, darken to like
so maybe that's what they're
like an orangey or a reddish.
Right.
But I think some subspecies, I think I did read, they are red instead, or orange or red instead. Okay. But I think those are more like horticultural. I could be wrong, though. Or cultivars, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, did you find in your research whether they're insect pollinated or whether they self-pollinate?
I did. Based on a 2002 study I read, I think there's good reason to think they don't self-pollinate, though there are studies saying that they do.
That's what I found. There was discrepancies. I found one study that said they definitely don't self-pollinate.
Yeah.
And then I found another study that said, no, they do.
So when we say they don't self-pollinate, what we mean by that is that they effectively do not self-pollinate. It's just that
it's not a significant way of...
Right. Yeah. We'll talk about this in a minute, but witch hazel is already a plant that puts out so few fruits as it is, and then when you self-pollinate, it's either... there's either no fruits created or the amount of fruits that's created is so low.
So small.
When we look at entire groups of trees and whatnot, it's such a tiny percentage that actually goes through with putting out fruit that it's essentially as if they don't self-pollinate.
Okay.
So
it's not significant.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you cut the number of fruits that even develop by half, I think, or maybe
more.
it's even less than half. By self-pollinating. It's not anything that this plant does regularly. And I should say that naturally, this plant's only putting out about 1% of its possible fruits that it could be putting out, based on the number of flowers that it puts out. So it puts out so many flowers, and only 1% of those really make it through to becoming a fruit.
Yeah, the one study I said, they looked at hundreds of, maybe it was thousands of flowers,
right.
And they found less than 1% of those flowers actually set fruit.
Yeah, that was one of the studies that I looked at, and they looked at 40,000 flowers.
I think we were looking at the same one. But it makes sense, because think about it. This flowers in the fall, and what makes walking in the fall so pleasant? There's no insects.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It blows my mind that this plant has evolved this strategy to set out these flowers when there's so few pollinators out. Like, why wouldn't this thing evolve to have wind pollination, rather than insects?
You know what, though? Just looking around, there are still other things flowering. Like, just look behind you. We have white snake roots flowering. We still saw goldenrods.
But we don't like white snake root.
But there was goldenrod, white snake root. I think there was a couple
the asters
other things.
Are flowering.
Yeah.
And
I think this plant really holds out. And from what I read, they usually wait until about up to 2 weeks before the first frost is when they'll officially start opening their flowers. And then they're around for about, well, they're not around for very long after that, only 3 or 4 weeks, and each flower only lasts about 8 days.
I have a good analogy here. This is like the crappy convenience store that stays open at like 4 in the morning because after everything else is closed, it's like, this is the only place you can get some pollen or nectar, so you better come to me.
Right. So you had mentioned before, you had asked what pollinates it?
Yeah.
So it's mostly flies and bees, but it's about 73% flies. And among that, 42% of those are fungus gnats. And this is actually in the same study that you and I looked at. When they actually looked at the pollen that are on these fungus gnats, 70% of the pollen was all Hamemelis.
Sure.
So they're really waiting until they're the only game in town.
Right,
really, that's
exactly.
what it seems like, or close enough to the only game in town.
So why don't we talk about the fruit and the seeds now?
Sure.
All right. So when a flower is pollinated, that's the other
Be
crazy
careful.
Right, exactly. So when the flower receives the pollen, it actually doesn't fertilize the ova until when?
Oh, it doesn't happen until like the next March.
I heard until May.
Oh,
That's what I read. It may receive the pollen sometime in the fall, mid to late fall, maybe even early winter, but it's actually not going to do the fertilization until the following spring. And then that flower will develop into the seed capsule. And how would you describe these capsules? They're about, this one's a small one in front of us right now. It almost looks like a green fuzzy acorn, wouldn't you say?
I'm surprised that it looks four-parted, because it's a bicarpellate.
Right, so it's two-chambered.
Yeah, two-chambered ovary, but this really looks four. I mean, it looks very clearly like four.
Yeah. Maybe because they're young.
Oh, but look at this. This is split in half, and it still has that four-parted look.
Yep.
It has a weird four-parted look, but it still splits in half, and it's just bicarpellate. It just looks like four, I guess.
So the fruit it's woody, and it can get up to about 3/8 of an inch long. Okay, so almost half an inch long. Each chamber within, when it's ready, will hold one glossy black seed about 1/4 of an inch long. So as Steve mentioned before, the cool part is during the late fall, again, sometime between September and November. So remember, folks, these are the fruits that were fertilized. I'm trying to make the point that these were last year's flowers.
Well, yeah, let's talk about it this way. So the way you can think about it is, let's say in autumn 2015. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, I should say, for people who are listening to this podcast late, right now, we're in fall 2016, and now let's go back to autumn 2015. Right. And that's when there's the pollen transfer. So the pollen is transferred to the stigma, and then the pollen tube starts to grow. But then it sort of stops, and it stays like that all winter long. And then in the spring, that's when fertilization occurs. And that's what Bill was saying. He heard May, I thought I heard March. Somewhere in the spring, fertilization occurs. It's around the time that the new leaves are produced. So it sort of waits until it's getting that growth. And then the fruits reach maturity in, do you know? It's like late August.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. It takes a few months even for the fruits to mature. Yeah.
So this seed capsule we're looking at right now, this was last year's flower.
Exactly right. And they'll remain on the plant even, I mean, we could be seeing flowers right now that could still be there, not dehisced, not dried out, not ready to explode, even when this year's flowers come on.
Right.
So, I mean, I just think that's crazy. And then as soon as they dry out, the two seeds are ballistically ejected. I love the word ballistic. I want to keep using that all the time. Yeah.
So I read when temperature and humidity are just right, that's when the seeds are ejected. And it makes a snapping or a popping sound when they're ejected. So it's also, you said it's also called...
Snapping alder.
And I heard snapping hazel was another word for it, too.
My experience has been that that's usually in the spring, though.
Really? Because all the accounts I read said it's in the fall.
I wonder if maybe some stay on, maybe it's like they stay on too long type of thing.
Maybe.
And I'm sure there's variation. I wouldn't...
That may be because the trick is you pick them, take them home, put them on a table, and after a while they pop.
They pop?
So you're setting them off.
Yeah.
Maybe. So I've never heard them. I've never been there when they have popped, but you've been there and seen them?
Yeah, I've done that.
Okay. At home or in the wild?
At home.
Okay. So have you ever seen them in the wild doing their thing?
No.
So.
just imagine a snapdragon or an impatiens or something. Yeah.
Well, I hope it's more impressive than that.
What? Those are impressive. Those are really impressive.
Wait a minute. Jewelweed is the one.
It is.
Impatiens.
But that doesn't go 20 or 30 feet.
Oh, yeah. But that doesn't.
Right, okay.
That doesn't go 20 or 30. Well, I'd never heard 30 feet. Did you hear 30 feet?
I heard 30 feet is an extreme.
Okay,
but most
the wind has to be just right,
That's right,
and it has to hit a deer when it's going, and the deer will walk it a little bit.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, I think we're a little too early right now to see them going. But, folks, this is one reason we chose witch hazel as the topic for our episode now, because this will be released in early October sometime. Mm-hmm. Right, Steve?
Right.
Yeah. Steve's going to do the editing on this one.
Will I?
Maybe. So we're hoping this will be out in early October, and we want to give people a chance to go out and look for witch hazel. Mm-hmm. Because if you're living anywhere in the East or the Midwest, you should be able to find this species out there. All right, so anything else about the seeds?
Yeah, I actually think I do want to say something about it. So we had said that the flowers aren't fertilized until the next spring, but even by that December, you have 80% of the flowers falling off of the plant. Did you come across this? No. So, and they actually had some pretty cool line graphs for this, and this precipitous drop in flowers that stay on the plant. So this is what we were talking about before, where there's a very low seed set. So even though there's tons and tons and tons of flowers, very few of those seeds end up actually coming to fruition, I guess. And so you have 80% of the flowers falling off by December, and then by March, only 8% of flowers are remaining. So it loses an additional 12% on average over the winter.
You shouldn't have flowers in the winter.
Yeah. And now that there's 8% left, they're fertilized. So 8% of them are now fertilized. And then out of that remaining amount, between 70 and 90% of those flowers are lost before July.
Gosh.
Right. And then that tiny percentage that's left, those are the fruits that develop. So they were wondering, does this have anything to do with an allocation of resources? They want to know if it's a source-sink type of relationship. And what they did was they removed a ton of flowers. So on single branches.
Early in the flowering season?
Yeah, very early in the flowering season. I think they did it before December. So it was before the majority of them fell off. Yeah. So they removed 70 to 85% of the flowers, and still they had no better seed production on those branches at all. It has nothing to do with the amount of pollen that is in the area in terms of fertilization, and it has nothing to do with resources. So they're not allocating resources, and there's no shortage of pollen. They're just falling off.
This is just what the tree does.
The tree just does this. There is a reason that they think the tree does this, though. Something that we didn't mention with the flower, we didn't really describe the flower other than the petals, but the flower is perfect. So
male and female parts.
So it's male and female. And it's sort of what Bill and I had just said not too long ago, is that they don't self-fertilize. At least
not
effectively,
much.
They don't really self-fertilize. And they don't know the mechanism for how they don't self-fertilize, but they think it maybe has something to do with the pollen tube. The plant can sense something, and then if it's its own pollen, it aborts the flower. Yeah. Now, this kind of comes back to something else that Bill had said earlier, is that these usually grow in patches, and we think we can relate that to the seed dispersal because
it's not going out far.
Yeah. So the seeds of a witch hazel are only going out like 20 feet at the most, yeah. And so you're just going to get patches of highly related witch hazels. And so what if you imagine what pollen is going to get on any witch hazel in that area? Probably a pollen of a close relative. And so even if it's not self-fertilizing, if it's a close relative, they think that is another reason to abort, because they don't want close relatives fertilizing other close relatives. Ah. So they might have some evolutionary history there with knowing if a pollen is somehow closely related to...
Knowing is in quotes.
Yeah, knowing. Yeah, knowing. Plants don't know anything, all right? So at least not in the traditional way.
But that's so cool. So they have this mechanism for, at least almost statistically speaking, making sure that they're probably going to get pollen from some other patch of witch hazel farther away in the woods.
Right, yeah. And this is sort of a problem that some plants have, where the male and female parts, at least in this species, they do develop at the exact same time. And that's a huge problem.
Right.
And so one thing that this paper that I had read had brought up was something called stigma clogging. And that's when you have low quality pollen clogging a stigma, because there's not really much surface area on the stigma. And
that sounds great. Low quality pollen.
But this is important, because if I just stopped there, low quality pollen, I don't think anyone would know what I mean.
That's racist.
Do you know what I mean by low quality pollen?
No, I don't.
Closely related pollen.
Okay.
So the plant may, because they grow in groups, and because there's not very many insects around, and because they do it so late in the year, and all these other factors, they put out such a small seed set. But those seeds that actually develop, those may be the ones that are pollinated with pollen from non-related individuals.
Right.
And I hope that was clear. Gerry, was that clear enough? Do you think I should describe it again?
That was a long way to get to that.
Sure.
That's all right. So I have to talk about a study that I found that it's about witch hazel, but it's more just a cool study.
Okay.
This was done in the Adirondacks and at Allegheny State Park, but these researchers had the idea that beaver put branches in the water to leach out chemical compounds that they don't like. So they did all these different experiments where they left out different kinds of fresh twigs and branches, and then they would soak some for different numbers of days and put them out to see what the beaver liked or didn't like.
Okay.
And they compared red maple, witch hazel, and a few other species. But they found out, for some reason, beavers, if they're going to eat witch hazel, they usually only like it if it's been in the water for at least 2 days.
Do you have an idea of why they might do that?
The thing they're hypothesizing is there's some chemical compound in the branches that get leached out in the water. They don't know what the chemical compound is.
I'm fairly positive that in my research I came across that witch hazel does contain a good amount of tannins.
Yes, it does.
That's one way to...
And tannins are usually pretty bitter.
What would be the word for it? Is to cure acorns or something? What would you call them? Like wash acorns?
I would say to leach.
To leach, you leach the tannins by putting them in water mostly.
That's right.
Yeah, you boil them or keep them in running or flowing water for a long time. Yeah.
Well, don't forget that witch hazel is used for aftershave lotion.
That's right. And
an astringent,
so that's,
right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So it does have those things in it.
But it was funny because they would soak it, and then the beaver, if it was soaked for at least 2 days, the beaver would take it and eat it. But if they left it out fresh, the beaver would stick it in the water. They'd say, oh, this witch hazel's not good yet, and they'd stick it in the water, and then they'd eat it.
2 days, though, that seems so fast. Though I did hear that the twigs of the witch hazel have low tannin contents, so that may be enough if it's low, you know?
Yeah, just to leach it out.
Yeah.
Since, Gerry, you brought up the medicinal qualities, I think we should talk about this.
Let me talk about this video. All right, so there was this lady in the woods, and she was talking about the medicinal properties of witch hazel. She was talking about the tannins and the astringent properties. And so she took a leaf, and she rolled it up, and she sort of crushed it a little bit in her hands. Not to destroy the leaf, but just to sort of break it up, break the skin of the leaf.
Get things flowing.
And then she was talking about her dry eyes, and that this is good for moisturizing the eyes and all this other stuff. So, sort of like what you see with people, they put cucumbers over their eyes. Yeah. She stuck the leaves to her eyes. And she just sort of like sat back and relaxed. I think that's where the video ends, but she's like a naturalist or something. I don't know.
In quotes?
Yeah, sure. I don't. She could be the best lady in the world. I don't know anything about her. I just watched her witch hazel video, but it was sort of a funny video to watch.
Well, it is amazing because if you go online and if you type in witch hazel, much more than any botanical information or information about the natural history, you get tons of claims about what witch hazel can do. There's tons of websites about, this is how you can make your own witch hazel, and you can use it to treat this and this and this, and just the list goes. It's everything. So it is astringent. Mm-hmm. That definitely has been proven.
Right.
And it has a long history of use. Native Americans
what do people use astringents for?
Well, for closing up pores and
like wounds and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's has so many claims of what it's used for. It's in anti-hemorrhoid pads, and it's used for eczema. I was looking into it. I tried to find studies that back this up. And there's very little out there. And I did find...
Like many plants. Right. Many claims about plants.
So I did find one cancer hospital, actually a couple cancer hospitals, that had a collection of pages on treatments that are out there, different home treatments or treatments that are being studied. And what they said about witch hazel, there are no meaningful studies of witch hazel. Extremely preliminary evidence hints that it may have anti-inflammatory properties, and even weaker evidence suggests witch hazel may increase the contractility of veins, so it might help with varicose veins, but the evidence is far too weak to support witch hazel's use. And most of the medical or scientific sites I looked at, they basically said, look, a lot of the evidence out there, it's very, very weak, but it's not harmful.
Right.
They can't find much to say. If you're going to use it, it's probably not going to harm you.
Be careful saying that, though, because...
It may prevent someone from getting treatment.
Right. That's where the harm comes in, is that they're wasting their money on something that's not going to help when they could be doing something better, or they just don't do the better thing at all.
Right, because, I'm using witch hazel.
Right.
Yeah. But I did find on those cancer research hospital websites, there were a couple references to studies that looked into treatment of colon cancer. Mm-hmm. And they did say that it shows promising evidence. There was one study that said it reduced colon cancer cells by 50%.
Interesting.
And there seems to be several studies that I found in just a quick search that had promising evidence. So that is being studied right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but it is astringent. Like I have a bottle in my medicine cabinet, and if I cut myself shaving, I'll throw it on.
Man, you're a pseudoscience person.
All right, so do you have anything else?
No, I think that's more or less it.
So what do we want to tell people to wrap up?
Okay, so we did want to thank a few people. On our iTunes, we got another review.
Yay!
Yeah. Now, I'm going to try to pronounce this person's name. It's not easy. It's Sifajikstubex. I'm not lying to you. I think they typed in a bunch of random letters, I think.
I would say Sifajikstubex.
Yeah, so thank you very much. A very, very nice review. I'm not going to go into it completely here. This person was very nice. They also suggest a couple things. It was specifically to do with the vegan episode, and Bill and I do plan on doing a follow-up to that, just a sort of a mini episode or something.
Yeah, a mini follow-up.
Yeah, a mini follow-up, because there was a new paper that came out, and we really want to talk about that. The paper was claiming, or the articles about the paper were claiming that this paper was saying that the vegan diet was not good for the environment.
So we wanted to give our response.
Yeah, we wanted to respond to that because we don't think the articles are saying exactly what the paper was saying, but
it was
we want
poorly reported on.
Right, so we want to go into that, and we'll talk about, this person will get a second shout-out in that episode, in that follow-up. So thank you very much for the review, and if you guys want to review us, just visit us on iTunes. We really appreciate reviews, and it really helps other people find out about the podcast.
Helps a lot, yeah.
And then we also want to thank two Patreon patrons. We just...
So we want to thank Lee and Alyssa for their very generous donations to Patreon. Those were our first Patreon donations, and it was huge for me and Steve. We were just really moved, and we wanted to say thank you so much. It was nice to have people that we don't know supporting the podcast and saying that what we do means something to them.
That was so exciting. I had to call Bill. I was like, can you call? And then he didn't call me quick enough, so I called him. So that was incredibly exciting. It's going towards the show. When we get enough money, it goes towards Kiva. Super exciting.
So thank you very much to Alyssa and Lee for their donations. And if you're interested in making a donation, any listeners out there, just go to Patreon.
They have to go to patreon.com/thefieldguides. So pretty simple, yeah. If you want to get in contact with us, we post every day to our Facebook. And so subscribe to those notifications so you see what we're posting every day. We're also on Instagram, Field Guides Pod. You can email us at thefieldguides@gmail.com. And we do want to, just as another follow-up, so last episode we said that Gerry, he didn't like that we were using Fahrenheit and Celsius. And
Not this Gerry.
Not this Gerry, but another Gerry had said that he doesn't like that we use Fahrenheit and Celsius in that same episode. And I think Bill and I have decided that we're going to go with Kelvin. Am I right? So I mean, it's this morning, just to get things rolling, right? So it was a very chilly 285 degrees.
Kelvin?
Kelvin, yeah.
Right.
So I hope no one minds that we just use Kelvin from now on. But
I think we should also say thank you to Gerry because he sent us another email just this morning letting us know he found a map of Valcour Island. That was our last episode we did when Steve and I had trouble finding the heron rookery. Mm-hmm. He sent us a map showing where it is, so we have reason to go back and do a part 2 next spring. We'll call it the Return to Valcour Island.
You know, and Bill and I didn't say it in the last episode, but we did go off path a bit.
Yeah.
And we still didn't find it. So, you know, and it's a pretty big rookery, so we should be able to find it if we give it another shot.
In the spring.
Yeah.
All right, part 2.
Oh, do we want to remind people about Gerry's book one more time?
Oh, yeah, Gerry Rising. The name of the book again?
Birds and Bird Watchers.
All right, and they can get it. Do you recommend anywhere so they should buy it?
Well, you could buy it on the web. You buy it, hopefully, at bookstores.
Yeah, anywhere great books are sold, right?
Nice.
Let me make just one comment about it. When I started collecting the columns, I just saw it as a task, but I became quite enamored of my own writing. So I recommend it to people.
That's how we feel about our podcast.
Yes, good. I do too. That's a great podcast.
Well, thank you. And Gerry, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, and this is such a great place to end it, but I'm going to ruin it. When is a tree's least favorite month?
I don't know. When?
September! Oh, no. And then it's ruined like that. Well,
Leave it
bye,
to Steve.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.